you, Vicki.
Okay, well then we'll go ahead and get started. I just shared my screen. Can everybody see my screen?
I cannot.
Not yet.
No, let's try that again. All right, the only thing up on my screen is that early user flow that everybody probably saw way back when.
It's up there now.
Yep.
Okay, good deal. Good deal. Just didn't take on the first click. All right, well, real quickly, what I'd like to do, and this to be far less of a presentation and really more of a conversation. On the last call, we had started talking about the private pages for the shelters. And on the user flow here, just kind of orient everyone, we had kind of showed after, a shelter had joined and was logged in, they were going to get a dashboard. And from the dashboard, we had talked in a high-level capacity about sort of what was going to be the experience when they landed there. And really the objective of today is to sort of refine that and hone in on what are those things that are going to be most meaningful to shelters when they log in. Clearly, our number one desired action is going to be log in, complete the data matrix on a monthly basis, and keep them coming back. But with a lot of those inputs that are being collected, whether it's beginning animal count, ending animal counts, live release, other outcomes, et cetera, really trying to understand when they were first greeted into their private pages, that gives them some feedback and acknowledges that they're with their respective shelter or organization, what is it that is going to be most meaningful? We've talked sort of on a high level that there would be sort of three key experiences here. One being sort of the landing page, right? And the landing page is kind of where I'd like to focus first. But beyond that, there's going to be the data matrix, which I think we're all pretty crystal clear on. There's going to be the need for, we're calling it reports, but to go in and really look at the data that has been collected for that respective organization, and we would make that sort of viewable based on date range. So if someone wanted to look at year to date, they could select that accordingly, this month, last quarter, so on and so forth. And so we understand on a baseline the kinds of the type of information that's being collected and what can be sort of presented based on that. But what we're really looking for is some insight here in terms of what is it that's going to be most valuable when they land on here. Is it the last login? Is it being able to view, the completed records versus incompleted records? Is it helpful to have ending counts for the previous month presented on screen? So that's where I'd like to kind of open it up to the group and sort of get some thoughts and some feedback of what is going to make that experience most meaningful. And, based on what we're collecting, I'm not sure if we have the ability to present different information than maybe some of the other shelter management software programs like PetPoint or Chameleon are doing. So I'd love to get some thoughts around that, because we have the data. The question is what pieces of that data are going to be most meaningful when someone logs in?
Are you posing that question to me?
you and all the other shelter leaders that are on the call.
That's right.
So, because I'm coming to this a little late to the game because I just joined as a board advisor in the last year, and so this is the first time I've seen this flow chart. Can you show me, can you take me a little bit further than the flow chart to help me kind of answer that question?
Well, I can show you sort of a UI with some placeholder if that would be helpful. So I can give you a 2-minute tour of the sort of front end and back end if you think that would be helpful. So
because all I've really seen is the stuff that we've sent around between the board.
Sure. Okay, so let me give you sort of the quick elevator version of this. I won't drag you through the registration process because that could take a little bit of time. But So the thought is, from the main website, they're going to click register shelter, and please note that all of this content is placeholder right now. The communications team is working on developing out specific copy and so on and so forth. So they'll land, they'll be greeted, and they'll be acknowledged that they're on the shelter registration page. There will be some level of content here that sort of sets expectations before shelters come in to register to say, hey, here's the things you need to know. Maybe it's talking about the type of organization that we really think is the sweet spot. Maybe it's talking about needing a signed agreement, an authorized individual, so on and so forth. And so we're kind of doing a little expectation setting on this first landing page of the registration process. We're providing an ability for them to download the agreement, which is a requirement for completing the application, as well as a link to the actual registration experience. When they come to the actual form registration, currently we're in the process of revising it to 4 steps, but there's going to be a step wizard that kind of steps them through first setting up, they're identifying who they are and establishing username, password.
Got it.
So on and so forth. Then they would input some organization information, contact, facility information, and then upload their signed agreement, where we're also going to be asking for some data points in terms of what their annual budget is, what their intake is, and what their intake is really a percentage of the community that they serve.
Right.
So that's the kind of information we're collecting there. That information is being used primarily as a vetting process to understand sort of their size in relation to their community.
Yep. That makes sense.
So once they go through this process, they'll be served a success screen, and it goes into sort of a staging area in the back end where a SAC admin will be able to look at their application and approve them. After they're approved and they come back to log in, they'll land on, and again, this is all placeholder content today. They'll land on a landing page, a dashboard, which is where we're sort of asking the questions. When they first land on the dashboard, what are going to be the most meaningful pieces or elements or communications for them to see? And then, obviously, once they're in and they've kind of oriented and maybe they've consumed some information on this page, they do have the ability to go to a shelter data page where they will be able to, and I've purged all my data in here, so we're not going to see anything here, but they'll have the ability to, that would show a listing of all the records, and then they have the data matrix experience where they can come in and they can input their different values according to the whether canine or feline, intake versus outcome, and then they get a calculated value for the ending animal counts. And
Any
then they can go
import
ahead.
capabilities?
Pardon me?
Any import capability?
Not yet.
Okay. Not that it's a big deal, just thought I'd ask.
Yeah, our goal is to get the shelter companies, the software companies, to ultimately create the forms directly, and then we can look at the import capacity from there.
Cool. Okay.
But we are having, I guess this is a question, we are having in the initial release export capabilities of the data entered. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay.
That's correct. So again, that would be handled sort of what we're calling the report section, and again, this placeholder is not actual, but that would be, again, ability to select by date range, and it would aggregate this. Don't react to the layout here. It's kind of all placeholder right now. It's actually in development on another code base that we're not accessing right now because it's various stages of being changed. And then the other experience within here, and I think we called it Learn on the wireframe. We've got information and updates right now. We can change that label as appropriate, but the initial thought for this experience was if there was new people being added to the system and they needed some training or something in terms of how to use the system, or if there had been some sort of organization updates, information. Really, it was going to be sort of an opportunity to communicate with them and also sort of assist them with any needs that maybe they have in filling out something, or if they had questions, maybe it has FAQs regarding some of the values that are being input.
Could webinars live here as well?
Yeah, webinars, videos, PowerPoint, sort of any content types that we think would be valuable could be included in this experience.
So this is an opportunity for Shelter Animals Count to communicate to each shelter, in a sense.
Exactly.
But it's the same data. Everybody's going to have the same page here.
Right. So the content on this page can be sort of a one-size-fits-all, so it would go across all shelters. If there was maybe a need to communicate individually with a shelter, then we could handle. That's currently not scope, but that's certainly something we could enable. That if there was sort of a one-to-one communications need between SAC and the shelter, that we could enable that as well.
Okay, cool.
So that's kind of a like I said, the quick high level.
Very, very helpful. So come back to the question now. What's the question?
Okay, so the question is after a shelter has completed the registration. Yes.
Can you hang on a second?
Sure.
Patty, were you able to, do I see you there? And now I see you gone.
It sounded like someone joined.
Yeah, I see her, but it looks like maybe she joined on the phone instead of on computer.
Yeah, I heard a joining sound and then I just wanted to double check in case she was there and could hear us. She may have given up. She didn't have time because she'd been out of the office, I think, to respond to the doodle. So, all right. Go ahead then. My apologies for interrupting. I just wanted to check and see if she had questions before we stepped into this section.
Okay, so then the question was, when after a shelter's gone through the registration process and they've been approved and they come back to log in, obviously the first goal or the primary mission here is to be collecting the data. But is there other sort of information or data points that are going to be important to the person responsible for this? And then, I'm not sure if it's going to be multiple individuals reporting on behalf of the organization or a single. I think that will probably depend based on organization to organization. But what would be some of those data points that would be helpful or meaningful that they would see after they log in?
And then I'm going to just add to that before we put Martha on the spot for responding. It may be helpful also, Jason and Steve, to explain the organization to facility structure as it may come into play with your question on dashboard reporting.
Okay. All right. That's good. Okay. So what Vicki is pointing out is some organizations may have multiple facilities, and I always use Wisconsin Humane as an example because I'm probably most familiar with them, but I know they have 3 facilities serving different counties up in their part of the country up there. And so the question is when they report, we're encouraging shelters to report on a facility level versus on a rolled up organization level. And one of the questions would be, would the information that you get on the dashboard, should that be different or rolled up for someone that's maybe like the authorized contact or the shelter director versus an individual that has disseminated the responsibility for just inputting an individual facility's information?
So you're talking about, do we want to have like a senior level manager view that gives you a broader look at the data than then which would be available to somebody who's just doing the data entry, like permissions levels and that kind of thing?
Right. So when someone registers, they could, if there's, say, 3 facilities, when they register, they could be registered for just a single facility, which would restrict their data view, or they may be like a super admin kind of level to where they can see all different facilities information.
I see. I think it would be cool if you had that capability, because I can see somebody handing this data entry task to someone who possibly isn't going to get the scope of the whole thing. But on the flip side, if we're going for transparency, and this is data that these communities or these agencies are already using pretty regularly, then I'm not sure what the risk is of allowing somebody who does the data entry to see a broader view. So I don't know that I could argue that I don't know what the infrastructure is required to build that sort of permissions-based data viewing, but my own take on it would be, it doesn't feel like a strong need to me. I think it'd be cool, but I don't know that it's a huge requirement.
Well, we can set the permissions, like for example, if there was multiple individuals or each responsible for a different facility, we could show them what the aggregated view is of all of the data, but when they go to input it, we can restrict it down to just their individual facilities that they're responsible for.
Yeah.
I mean, so we have the sort of logic in place where we can handle it. We just need to know sort of what the expectations would be. Would there be a problem with them seeing all of it, or should they not see all of it? Should they just see their own information? And I don't know if is there a possibility that even though there's multiple facilities, the inputs would be disseminated really to all of those individuals, so any of them could input values into the data matrix on behalf of a facility that maybe they're not primarily responsible for.
Yeah, I was going to say, because I know we were going back and forth on this on the internet, online, on email. I couldn't think of a single scenario where someone would be like, I'm asking them to enter data, but I don't want them to see data from, even if I let's say ask 3 shelter people for the 3 facilities to enter the data separately. I can't imagine someone at that level, if you're asking them to enter data that's going to be made public, be concerned with them seeing the data from their other facilities. I couldn't think of a single example where that would be, and if it was that strong, then I would say they should just set up 3 separate organizations, which is perfectly okay too.
I would agree. I would think the reverse, if there was some ability to drill down to individual animals and stuff, which is a down the road thing, I think we've all said. That would be more of a concern, but I suspect because this is going to be so public and it's going to be so critical that the kind of staff member you'd have doing that is going to be somebody who should be fairly comfortable with this data to begin with and understand the importance of the big picture. And so I think we're okay. When I was, as you were kind of talking through it, and I was thinking about what would I want to see, because my communities, I don't have multiple sites, at least not yet. I was thinking what could be interesting, and again, not a requirement, but it could be interesting to have something that, if, like in my community, there are 4, soon to be 5 agencies that are tracking data using pretty much the matrix, not exactly there, but pretty darn close. And I'm not sure I'm going to be able to get all of them to participate in Shelter Animals Count. I'm going to try. But if they all did, it would be really cool to see all the community, all the agencies that I'm associated with seeing their data here.
Yeah, and
we a roll-up of the respective communities' data as compared or contrasted with the individual shelter?
Yeah. And I mean, I guess all the communities would have to agree to that or something, but I just, to me, when I think about it, the message we keep pounding around here, and we just had a press conference on it on Friday, was you have to look at this from a community perspective, and each individual agency's data is only useful when you look at it in relation to the others. So it would be neat to drive that message home if it were possible within the shelter pages. But I know that the rest of the shelter or the rest of the website will do some of that too. So that may be adding complexity where it's not needed because you can do it elsewhere.
Well, that's what I was just going to ask Steve. How would that be different than the
what's public?
View
Exactly.
Right.
I mean, would it be different?
Well, we had a very specific conversation about this because we thought, well, what if you have that sort of private-public data mix and what to do? And what we had decided for phase 1 was not reward the people not making their data public. So at first we thought, let's not add complexity. Let's, you know, if you're making your data public and it's going on the signs, we're going to be able to do it at the county level, right? That's what's going to be the public level data. So that's going to be available to everyone, so we don't have to build it separately in the portal. If we find later that there's a barrier to getting organizations on, we can look at that as a second phase to add something within the portal, within your login, that would give them some more detailed level data. But the goal first was to get them to do it publicly so that we don't have to build an internal data reporting system just to show the private data. So that was sort of, and I'm trying to remember who was in it, but we had I remember having a pretty lively conversation about it, and we thought, well, let's focus on the people who are making the data public, and then if it becomes a problem, then we could address it later. Does people remember being in that conversation? I remember it very distinctly, and it was.
I recall it too, but I don't remember when it happened or what forum.
Yeah. But that was sort of the thought. The thought was, you know, we're going to make the data public at the county level anyway. So.
Yeah. Yep. That's what I was. I was responding to an email from someone else who was sort of frustrated about the fact that she's doing, you know, Asilomar stuff for this community thing over here, and then she's doing basic data matrix for something else over there. And I'm sure you've had that feedback already too, that people feel like now they're putting their data in all these different formats and everything's slightly different, so nobody's the same. And
yeah, well, that's the work. That's the work the Shelter Animals Count's going to have to do. Ultimately, some of it with our own partners, and some of it just with the community. That can we start becoming the standard? And that's going to that's going to take some work.
Yep. So I mean, again, that's a nice to have. And if the point is, hey, you want to see your community's data, you know, go here, or you know, as we walk people through it, we say, here's how you can see what's happening in your community. I mean, I think that covers it. I really like the layout from what I've seen so far that you've walked through. It seems very straightforward because you're sort of giving them a snapshot of. I'm assuming the shelter data counts. It's kind of in the middle of the page on the left here. Is that sort of cumulative for the year? What is that?
That's a question. I mean, because we have the ability to easily show that. So would the shelter count, would that be the previous month ending counts, or would that be some other data points or different ways of looking at them? I guess technically the ending counts for whatever the last month was would be the sort of totals for the year. So those are kind of one and the same, aren't they?
No.
That's the number in the shelter. Shelter ending counts of the animals in the shelter as you move from one accounting, kind of one shelter count period to another. So the totals would be either monthly totals or year-to-date totals for activity within each of the categories on the shelter animals count matrix. Patty, are you with us now?
I am. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sorry. I had some problems earlier on trying to get on, and so my mic wasn't working, and so I'm hybridizing with the phone and the computer. So yes, I'm here.
Cool. Thank you so much for making short notice time for this. So you and Martha are the two kind of shelter folks we have on this, but we are recording the session, so I can send it to the other shelter leaders as well, and if they have time to to listen to the recording, then they can give us some feedback too. This is what you're looking at on the shared screen right now is an example of essentially a landing page for each organization that is part of the database, and part of what we're getting some feedback on is what kinds of windows here would be helpful for shelter leaders to have on this. You know, it's almost like their little home page within the system. So feel free.
And these are just completely placeholder.
I'm sorry?
Like, these are, what you're looking at are just completely placeholder. There's no intention behind anything in the current view. It's really to understand from you guys what should be populated there that would be helpful to a shelter.
Well,
So,
yeah, I know that the question was related to the shelter data counts tally on the left-hand side, whether that would be monthly or year-to-date. Was that a previous question? And I would assume that that would be year-to-date.
That would make sense to me. Guys, I'm going to have to bow out. I'm sorry.
Thanks for taking time, Martha. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for the review. This was very helpful, and if we pick up another conversation, I'd be happy to keep playing with it. I think it's very cool.
Thanks.
So I think we just have to be specific about the fact year-to-date and make that clear, year-to-date or monthly, or because then there's ending counts too. The language is really quite similar to the beginning count and ending count that we use in the form, so I think we just have to be a little careful about the language that it's titled.
Okay. So if we're going to make that a year-to-date total, how does the math work to get to the year-to-date total? So I guess I was thinking that if you come in January, you can have a beginning inventory, right? You're going to go through your intakes and outcomes. You're going to end up with an ending value. Same cycle would repeat itself for February and March. So I was kind of under the impression that at the end of March, your ending counts, because you're always starting with a beginning, you're adding, subtracting, and ending with a different value, that the year-to-date should theoretically be the same as the ending value for the previous month. But it doesn't sound like that's the case.
No, I'm following you. See, this is part of why these conversations are so helpful. That would be the ending count. That's how many animals are in a shelter at the end of that accounting period. But that's not a number that is that gives shelter leaders a snapshot of a moment in time. On the last day of the month, as we rotated from one month to the next, this was the population of animals in our system. That's all that tells them. It doesn't tell them anything about outcomes or intakes. So usually what shelter leaders are looking at is what's the year-to-date total for intake, this year. What are the outcomes year-to-date so far? So those are the types of numbers, because that tells them what the total activity in and out of the organization has been. A quick snapshot might be helpful if they're trying to kind of reconcile differences or otherwise in their data and the data reporting, but that snapshot of kind of what the population in the shelter was at the end of the month is usually only something shelters are looking at carefully if they're trying to manage their population to a certain level in their shelter, or if there's a problem with the data and their beginning and ending counts are dramatically different from one month to the next, and they shouldn't be. Where you end the month be where you begin the next month. So it's exactly the kind of question we need to parse out.
Yeah, Jason.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was going to say, yeah. I mean, Jason, the idea would be ultimately, if you have a shelter with 500 cages, let's say, or 500 spots, the number should be somewhere in that range, right? That the idea is that that number actually stays consistent every single month in general, like in a range there. That's why that's when Jody's saying it's like that, and ultimately we'll want to build formulas to actually alert people saying, you had a 200, number change. Is this correct? Have you really had that kind of there? So it's very different than the cumulative, which is what they're saying is a cumulative number that says every month add the previous month to it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. I think what I heard too was that maybe being able to see some data points against year-to-date intake versus last month ending, because that's sort of the inventory you currently have. But if it would be beneficial, even if your inventory is 500, it's showing a year-to-date, maybe you took in 17,000 animals, seeing that number just to sort of put a little measure against scale or size or volume would be valuable. And then maybe that would also be valuable for outcomes too. And would that be just for outcomes in general, or would it be for maybe we drill down a little bit into specific types of outcomes?
So, this is Patty. I'm sorry I'm so late to the game on so many different levels, but can I ask a question related to the data in shelter data counts? So is there a reason? And I'm sure there's been some discussion about this. Is there a reason why this is really, is the measurement only the number of animals in the door?
No, it's based off of the basic data matrix, the National Fed's basic data matrix.
Right.
It's intake split out by different types of intake for canine and feline, adult and neonate, and then outcomes as well, adoptions, return to owner. So the data that we're collecting and the data that we can report out is the data that's in the basic data matrix. All of those data points are data that we could report out.
Right. So I went ahead and I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I understand that, and I've looked at the matrix, and so I understand that. But in terms of what we were just looking at on the previous screen, in the left-hand corner, what is that supposed to be representative of? Just that.
That's the question on the table right now. All that is purely placeholder right now. And so that's why we were hoping to get some insights on what would be the most valuable for the shelters logging into their pages. So what they get kind of at a quick view? Would it being the last month's ending animal counts, or would it be a year-to-date roll up?
For
how many it takes, or
for a quick view for me. Because you already have that, the monthly totals that you can refer back to. But for me, it would certainly be, cumulative totals year to date, and but it would be cumulative totals both for, both on outcomes and both on intake outcomes and then current inventory.
And would that be just outcomes in general? So let's say a total. Outcomes, or was there specific outcomes that are maybe more important, like with live outcome, like a total for live outcomes versus other outcomes, delineating between those? Is that important?
Yes, it is. Yes, to me it is. I'm not sure about others, but for me it is.
I would think so.
Yeah, that would be my guess. Let's make sure.
And then, Jody, I'm so hesitant to even throw this out there for fear of opening up a can of worms. But we discussed a long time ago, way earlier in our journey with this effort, the possibility, I don't think we ever landed on anything, but the possibility of providing calculators that would allow an agency to use whichever form of calculation they're currently using, whether that's live release rate, save rate, what have you, and offer those calculators against their data set. I don't know if we even want to go there, but in thinking about what would be helpful, I just wanted to raise that again since we had talked about that early on as a possibility.
And so this would be only in the shelters page. This isn't necessarily a public button that can, because that's what I think we don't want to do is any,
I agree.
Okay, we're only going to, in the public world, it's just the totals of data for those organizations that have stayed transparent. So, Patty, the question would be, you know, we've got all these formulas out there, ASPCA live release rate, Asilomar live release rate, save rate, euthanasia rate, adoption rate. Would having the option on this page of either having a quick rundown of how your numbers, you know, year to date look using those different formulas, or having a button that you can press that then gives you that rate, would that be helpful in that home page? So this is the private side of the...
Probably on the private side, yes. I mean, I think it's, you know, I mean, I was at a meeting last week with a number of colleagues, and I think that there was, you know, a lot of discussion about, I mean, there was certainly amongst a number of us about, you know, the move, you know, people simply aren't, you know, using Asilomar in terms of calculation anymore. People are making that decision to move away from that. So, I mean, what are we suggesting to people that they will just, that I mean, that they could use this calculator to calculate, you know, the various ways that they're you know, measuring their data, or calculating the percentage of their I guess live releases, for a better word, or save rate, outcomes.
Yes, we'd give shelters the option of kind of choosing if there was, you know, there could be a button for a variety of different formulas that are out there. We've stayed away from this from a shelter animals count perspective because we felt it wasn't helpful for us to get lost down the rabbit hole that is, you know, what's a good indicator for the success of an organization. We actually think it's probably a whole host of indicators.
Well, then why even provide it then?
Okay.
Because so I agree with that. There's much more. There's much more to be measured. So why provide it and you can get stuck in that place?
Okay. And it occurs to me, Vicki, that we also we couldn't do Asilomar because we can't do unhealthy untreatables. They're not in the kind of a matrix, so we couldn't do that anyway, which is one of the common ones out there. We could do save rate, we could do live release as used by the A, but we had enough to do. Maybe we skip it at this point, and this is part of the recording. So if shelter leaders who view the recording think otherwise, we can revisit it. Probably at a board level, I think we'd have that conversation. Does that sound okay, Vicki?
Yeah, absolutely. And particularly if it's going to potentially prove more controversial than helpful, then absolutely we shouldn't include it. I just wanted to raise it because we never really, we weren't at the point of landing on it back then, but
it's a good question to raise.
It's relevant, yeah.
Yep. Thanks, Patty. That was helpful. So year-to-date numbers in both intake and outcome categories. Anything else? And I know your view of kind of what this all looks like, but
now is that? Can I ask a question though? Is that on the public or the private side? Then is that is that?
This is all. This discussion right now is all for private.
Okay. Okay.
This is on the shelter.
Your shelter.
In the public world, the shelter will choose as part of the registration process whether they want their data to be transparent to the public or not. So on the public side, it's just data. We're not making calculations at this point. No, you know, we provide the opportunity to run reports. You can go on the website as it exists today and do some sample reports if you want to look at it. Yeah.
Okay.
But no calculations.
Okay. Thanks.
Yep. Anything else that comes to mind for you that would be helpful on that internal private shelter page from a numbers perspective? And the only numbers we have to work with are these, the national database numbers.
Pretend we're like 3 years from now. Would it be helpful to have some kind of shelter-specific year-over-year comparisons within this dashboard view that we're dealing with right now?
Yes, yes, yes. Some yearly comparisons, absolutely.
And for the yearly comparisons, would it be helpful to have both year-to-date over year-to-date and maybe the last month entered over last year's same month?
Yes.
At the same time? Okay.
Yes.
Do you follow
So,
that?
I'm not sure I did. Was that it would be helpful to have current month or last month entered versus that same month in prior years, as well as year-to-date versus year-to-date in prior years?
Yes.
Okay, got it.
I think that's what you were suggesting, or you were asking, Jody, and I'm agreeing. Yes.
Yeah. What's not often, I mean, this number is fine to have as part of a report. We do these crazy reports for partner communities at the EA, and one of the numbers that always drove me a little bit crazy was having the previous year's total number instead of the year-to-date number, because then you're not comparing apples to apples. It's hard to look at, this is January through April of 2014 compared to January through December of 2015. So you really have to carve out that same year-to-date time frame in order to give the shelter meaningful information. You can always have that 2013 total out there somewhere, just as because that's a number often shelters are looking at how the year they're in the middle of is going to stack up against. But it can't be used for those comparisons. Always used to drive me nuts. I'm like, just give me the same year-to-date time frame.
Yeah, it seems like there's some interesting charting opportunities, whether it's with a bar, a line graph that does the year-over-year by month, so you can kind of see how you're trending against prior year or years or even month-to-month.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just want to throw in, because I'm trying to stay quiet because I don't want to, totally affect that. But I mean, the one thing I just want us to be just careful of and put in perspective is most of our clients are going to be pulling this information out of shelter management systems, which already have, like, I get that sometimes this will be easy to have it, but I'm guessing unless you're a small shelter and this is going to be your primary method of data collection after this, they're going to have much more sophisticated reports in their system. So I just wanted to kind of go back and make sure we keep that perspective, that this doesn't replace their shelter management systems, which are going to have much more detailed reporting. So I just want us to be careful that we don't overbuild because we forget the fact that they could get this data from their own systems.
Good point.
I have a question that kind of bridges, I guess, from this meeting to the other one that we still need to have on timing. But just for, I guess, my clarity, are we intending to have the dashboard view and the reports module, the shelter reports module at launch? Is that what we're aiming to have?
That's the goal. The goal is to have those intact. Now, what we sort of scope for phase one versus some of these other things, some other possibilities, we may have to come into a later release. But the goal is at least there will be a reports view to where, if nothing else, there would be the ability for them to look at their data based on date ranges, on however they decide to define that, whether it's month, quarterly, year. And on the dashboard, some of these calculations, like we're talking about intakes and outcome totals and that sort of thing, for performing those calculations, the bar is pretty low on doing that. So I feel confident we can have some of those data points for release. Now, charting year over year, month over month, and if we're going to allow any sort of filtering or anything else as part of that, that wasn't ever really intended to be part of Release 1, but having the discussion and understanding sort of what the future vision is, I think is certainly beneficial.
Yeah, I agree. I raised that because unless we're wildly more successful than we're thinking in terms of getting shelters to enter back data, that may not be an immediate need or benefit.
So let's talk about that real quick, because that is ultimately the primary mission of this initiative is, right, get all the data activated, get them capturing information. On this landing screen, it seems like that we're going to need to prompt them for a certain level of input. So we're not asking them to join in April and just put in April numbers. When we ask them to join, we really want not just January through April of this year, but we probably want them to go back 12 or 16 months and input data from prior months and years. Yes?
Yes, where we landed on that is that the minimum requirement to participate is beginning with 2015 reporting. However, we are strongly encouraging them to enter prior years as far back to 2011 as they have the capability and appetite for.
Okay, so it seems like that would be something that would be valuable to SAC on this main landing page is an acknowledgement that, you know, of what is, I guess, what would be desired in terms of showing current records that have been input and then sort of prompting them maybe through some sort of color coding or something like that saying, please input, and then we have the month/year that we're requesting there. Would that be accurate?
Yeah.
Patty, do you have any other questions based on this little bit that you've been able to see here today? I know it's tough.
I guess one of the things, and I know that there's been a lot of discussion, you know, I'm sure about this in terms of the age break on up to 5 months, and then you know, considered adults there after that. But you know, I mean, we you know, we have you know, we've had a different break in terms of, you know, the adults and then and juveniles in our system, and so I'm just wondering what that's going to look like for people who probably maybe have that same issue in going back and trying to reconstruct some of their, you know, going back potentially several years to input data.
What's the age break for you guys?
6 months.
It's going to be fine. We don't really care if it's 5 or 6 months. We use 5 months because the veterinarian said that's actually when the canine activity tends to happen. But it's not, we want kind of generally juvenile and generally adult, recognizing.
We'll just need to communicate that to people then, that that's not going to, you know, that's not going to be the biggest issue then.
Yep.
Which actually raises a question that oddly didn't occur to me when we were doing the walkthrough on this the other day. There are extremely helpful and detailed descriptions for each of these data matrix fields. And I thought we had originally, Jason, Steve, myself at least, talked about those being able to appear through hover or something. Are we still working towards incorporation of those descriptions?
That's a good point. I think we absolutely, every bit of text that's in the, that we have has to be somewhere on the site. That's a very, very good point. And we want to make sure that that's incorporated in. So we want to think about it because there is quite a bit of text. And maybe that's just on the information page that we talked about earlier. But I mean, I think at this point, and Jody, you let me know if you agree, we should start incorporating that content as if it's ours, right? We should just start, we don't have to keep referring back to a separate piece of paper. We could start including that directly in the site without stepping on the National Fed's toes.
Yeah, no, you won't step on our toes. Go ahead. I'm trying to schedule right now the National Fed board meeting where they will give you that intellectual property. I'm sure of it. So with that, yeah, go ahead and incorporate it. If something goes terribly wrong, we'll give you wholehearted permission at least to use it all without having to get specific permissions. But I don't see any problems with it. SAWA supports it. National Fed supports it. I don't see a problem. It'll be harder to get that board meeting scheduled, frankly, than to get you the permission. So.
I just have found in working with my team that those descriptions, like we keep coming back to those descriptions all the time when a question comes up. I just have found them to be very helpful.
So those descriptions are basically like definitions of what is intended by like stray at large or up to 5 months or the different
examples of what to
labels.
include. Yep, examples of what to include within particular categories.
So what if we did this? What if we lined up those definitions over on the right-hand side, and where they get deep, we could do like expandable lists. So on click or hover, it would reveal what that entire definition is.
Like it.
And we could just kind of keep those to the right of each one of these sections. So like, ooh, transferred to another agency. I'm not sure how to handle that. And so we give them a little definition. They can click right here. It expands, and they can see that. Do you think that would solve for that issue?
I think so.
Okay. All right. Yeah. I think you know, the goal here is, because this is a pretty large form, the more we sort of layer in with hovers, the more vulnerabilities or stability issues you can sort of create. Not that it's not doable, but I would prefer to handle it adjacent to, if that seems like a workable solution.
I think that's just as good. What I don't think is as good is them having to toggle to a separate resource page to find those definitions. So if we can handle it on the same page as you're describing, I think that would totally meet the need.
Yeah, that is the intent of that right-hand column, which I think that's just the scrape for placeholder. It should probably say lorem ipsum, because it's probably a little misleading. But with that title, should probably say like terms and definitions, or whatever the appropriate language is. And then beneath each, we could just do like, I'd say let's go with like a little expandable list where they just click on it and it reveals the full definition for each of those terms. I think that would probably be the most elegant solution and allow us to kind of keep everything perfectly aligned. Exactly.
And you have all those definitions, correct?
I have a copy of a PDF file of the data matrix.
That's it.
So I'll have to scrape it out of there, but yeah, I mean, I can put my hands on it.
You could turn that in. You could turn that into text, or do you need? Because I think Jody, you have it as a document, right?
Yeah, the original lives with me, so I can just send it to you as a Word document.
That would be great. That way, when stuff doesn't copy-paste out cleanly, you don't have to rely on Jason's spelling capabilities.
I want to be sensitive to the time. I see 2 minutes, and Jason, I think you had a hard stop on the hour. Patty, was any remaining thoughts you wanted to share with us at this point? You're going to have some additional opportunities as development continues to kind of see what this all looks like. And
no, I appreciate the opportunity for input. Would you be okay with me? Tara Yerkshat from our staff is sort of our statistics guru here, and really, you know, is on top of all of our stats. Would you mind if I share this with her and try for some potential feedback?
I would love that. I would love that. So when we send the recording out, feel free to share it with her and let her dig around. Would love it.
Okay. Okay, great.
That's a great idea. Why don't we, Jody, maybe we do, and maybe not right away, and maybe give them a little time, is why don't we ask all the shelter executive directors on our board if they would volunteer their operations person to take a look at it.
Sure.
I think that
you've got a lot of brilliant ones.
Yeah, and I think you'll just get a lot better feedback than from me if you have people like that, who are going to raise, really the best questions.
Well, and we either get those questions now or we get them when we launch. So isn't it smarter to get them now?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And at the risk of requesting the obvious, when we send that out, I think we should, and Steve, you could probably, between you and Jason, provide this, but I think we need to include a deadline for that feedback.
Sure.
Well, I think we could do another, maybe we do another meeting like this, but if we could get, like I said, I mean, so many of the executive directors who are on our board, I know they're operations people, and they're also incredible people that would be great to have their much more detailed feedback on. I would say if we could get maybe if we could make that invite, maybe do something 2 weeks out, even if it's a week before, even if we go into the conference, even if we can't fix everything, it's nice to be able to answer the questions immediately at the things like that. Yes, we know about it, we're addressing it in the next 2 weeks, is way better than going, when Jody and I are speaking and going, wow, that's a great idea, we never thought of that.
Yeah.
Let's see what we can manage schedule-wise, Steve. It's really,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is about this month, but folks are really tied up, so let's see what we can manage. But for now, let's wrap up this meeting, and thank you so much, Patty, for jumping on board. You helped save this chunk of time and giving us some initial feedback. Thank you.
Okay. I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks so much. Okay.
Thanks.
All right, thank you very much.
Hey, guys, we still need to have our other meeting about the timeline.
Yeah.
Do we have, Jason, do you have a minute to open your calendar?
Yeah, let me open my calendar. And let's see here.
So it's us and Lisa Pedersen that we're looking for, right?
Yep.
Okay. I've got my calendar open on the other screen.
I've got quite a bit of time this week, so what looks good for folks?
Let's see.
My Tuesday and Wednesday is the most flexible. Otherwise, my Thursday and Friday are they're pretty tight. And with Tuesday and Wednesday, unfortunately, it's not time zone friendly, but my mornings, I'm basically free up until about 1 or 2 o'clock. 2 o'clock on, actually, 1:30 on Tuesday, and then I'm free till 12:30 on Wednesday, and then I free back up again around about 3:30 or 4 o'clock.
Hey, Jody, I'm just seeing, in looking at the calendar, that I've got at least an exec committee meeting on my calendar for Wednesday. Is that accurate?
It is accurate.
Would it, I'm not trying at all to hijack your meeting. I have no idea what all you need to cover, but would it make sense to have that group be part of the timing discussion?
I think it's too big. We need to hammer this out, and I'm getting to the point that I'm narrowing as opposed to broadening
Gotcha.
decisions because they need to happen, and I might get dinged for that later, but at this point I feel like we just need to decide what a reasonable timeline is, and that'll be it, and then I'll hold people accountable to that in terms of what we need from the rest of the board.
Well, given that, would it be helpful for us to have that meeting and make those determinations prior to the exec committee so we can
It would, yeah.
discuss the outcomes?
Yeah. I have a really lovely wide open day tomorrow except from 9 to 10 Pacific time. So that's noon your time. I could certainly meet before that from 8 to 9 Pacific time. I don't know, Steve, if you're available tomorrow.
Yeah, I only have something right now, and I was just looking. I have someone trying to send me an appointment now, but I can't see what time zone it is. But I have something from 10 to 11 Pacific time. Otherwise, I'm open. I could definitely do the 8 o'clock slot, and then anything after 11 Pacific time.
Does 11 Eastern time work for you, Vicki?
Yep.
Cool. And I think that was within your window, right, Jason?
Yep, that's 11 o'clock is great. Now, Steve, are you on Pacific time now with this time flip-flop?
Yes, me and Jody are now on Pacific time.
Oh my God, it's impossible to keep track of you guys.
Nobody hates more than we do. I will take care of the appointment reminder and the conference call line. I've pulled up an appointment. I'll fill it out right now and send it to you guys. So we'll meet tomorrow morning, 8 Pacific, 11 ET, and wrap up that timeline. And then, Vicki, you and I will be in good shape for the exec and chairs conversation on Wednesday.
That sounds good.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys.
All right, thank you guys. Today was very helpful.
You.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.